The Effects of Education, Sexual Orientation, and Liberality on Religious Devotion by Balls Falls.
We are looking to measure the effects that education, sexual orientation, and liberality have on one's level of religious devotion. We've created an index of questions to serve as our dependent variable. We then created a correlation matrix to measure the significance of the relationship between each independent variable and our dependent variable. Using regression analysis, we analyzed the measure of association, the explained variance, and the beta values between each independent variable and our dependent variable.
We created an index to measure levels of religious devotion. This was done by combining the answers of 3 questions from ANUS 2011. Do you consider religion to be an important part of your life or not? Outside of religious services, do you pray? And do you think the Bible is the Word of God? These questions fit together conceptually as each measure a distinct aspect of religious devotion.
Since the alpha score is above 0.6, this means that our questions adequately measure the same concept. With regards to the alpha if deleted results, the question, do you consider religion to be an important part of your life or not, is the most important aspect of our index, as our alpha score would drop from 0.76 to 0.61 if it was deleted. Looking at our raw index, the average score is 2.8, which shows us that most Americans have a relatively high level of religious devotion. This is confirmed as the mode was 4.0, demonstrating a large percentage of Americans have extremely high levels of religious devotion. Looking at our recoded index, the average score is 2.56, which shows us that the majority of people have a moderate to high level of religious devotion. This is confirmed through the mode, which at 3.0 demonstrates that a large percentage of Americans have high levels of religious devotion.
Based on the rationale theorized by Stephen A. Peterson, religions that contain and prescribe a holistic view of society tend to restrict the emergence and development of liberality. We believe that respondents with more conservative values are likely to be most religiously devoted. Buren and Koenig found that persons with less education were more likely to turn to faith for relief than were the more educated respondents, and thus justify the rationale that those with higher education will tend to be less religious. Finally, Wagner and co. theorized that many gay men believe they must abandon their religious faith in order to accept their sexuality. We therefore base our rationale on the premise that because many religions forbid homosexuality, homosexuals will tend to be less religiously devoted than their heterosexual counterparts.
The Pearson's R-scores listed in our correlation matrix show us that only liberality shows a significant relationship with one's level of religious devotion. Its score of negative 0.26 indicates a fairly strong relationship, whereas that between education level and religious devotion and homosexuality and religious devotion are statistically insignificant. Liberality explains 6.8% of variance in the dependent variable, education level and homosexuality explain 1.4 and 1.2% respectively.
We find that our combined independent variables explain 8.3% of the variation in the dependent variable. The F statistic shows our regression equation is not due to sampling error. Looking at our beta values, liberality has the greatest influence on one's religious devotion. As for each 1 unit increase in liberality, there is a 0.24 decrease in religious devotion. Our regression equation presented high tolerance levels, suggesting there is no problem with collinearity.
Judging by our R values, we conclude that only liberality has a significant effect on people's religious devotion. Despite the literature that supports our hypothesis, levels of education and homosexuality do not significantly impact religious devotion in this case. Our 3 independent variables combined only explain 8.3% of variation in religious devotion, which leaves tremendous room for further testing and experimentation.
Based on this data, we find that in the United States, even people who are very liberal, very educated, and or homosexual are still quite religiously devoted. In the United States, it is socially acceptable to be both highly religious and not religious at all. It would be interesting to test these results in a society where only one or the other is the social norm. For example, a religious-led state such as Iran, or in a very secular state such as France, and see how the results differ from this case.